On behalf of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, APNTS, as well as to the whole nation, we welcome you all to another important knowledge session on insolvency and bankruptcy landscape in India for corporates. This session will focus on how can business recover dues from the corporate using insolvency framework. Of course, in the insolvency case, one of the biggest challenges is how the creditors or the people who have lent the money, etc., will come back from the organization. At the same time, how to avoid getting into insolvency position also. And benefits of IBC for MSME promoters, benefits of pre-packed resolution plan, and personal guarantor insolvency. So these are the main areas which our consultants are going to discuss in this seminar. IICC APNTS branch under its professional members committee have initiated organizing series of knowledge sessions where our own professional members will address the members in important compliance subjects, mainly with respect to statutory and then tax matters, etc. Now, I would like to briefly introduce today's eminent speakers, Mr. VVSN Raju, founder and managing director, managing partner of Jurist Prime Law Services, and Mr. Raghu Babu G, co-founder and partner, Samasti Legal. Briefly about the speakers, Mr. VVSN Raju is the founder and managing partner of Jurist Prime Law Services, which was founded in 2005. He practices in the area of banking, corporate, insolvency, civil, criminal, economic, industrial, intellectual property, labor, secretarial, and real estate. And they are there from the last 27 years and appears regularly before the high courts, NCLAT, NCLT, DRT, and civil courts. He is also co-founder of Succeed Innovation Fund and director in India Innovation Fund and IKP Knowledge Park. Thai charter member, Rotarian, and an avid golfer. Of course, he's into all extracurricular activities, sports also. He is a graduate in science, postgraduate in law from Jindal Global Law School, and also qualified as insolvency professional. And they are also into country to country or bilateral tax matters as statutory issues. Mr. Raghu Babu G is an entrepreneurial professional leader with 25 plus years of experience in the areas of M&A, capital raising, listing, business setups, corporate legal, corporate compliance, and governance. Insolvency resolution also is one of the forte. He is a co-founder and partner of R&A Associates, Samasti Legal, and is resolved. He is in board and advisor to few companies in India also. He is a Thai charter member and trustee of Abhaya Foundation. He is an angel investor and invested over 15 plus companies ranging from commerce, fintech, clean energy, no-code tech platform, and AIF, etc. So he has chosen very good sectors and very prompt and then very relevant sectors in the present day scenario, I think. He is a postgraduate in commerce, Bachelor of Law, fellow company secretary, and executive MBA, PG diploma, PGP Max from Indian School of Business. And when it comes to the IICC APNTS branch at Hyderabad, service serves to both our states, Andhra Pradesh as well as Telangana. We regularly organize seminars and interactive meetings for our members and work closely with US Consulate, Hyderabad. In fact, yesterday we happened to meet the new team of US Consul General, Mr. Reef, and then his whole team, our national chairman, and then the current chairman of APTS, vice chairman, all these people, we went and then met them. And then we discussed various matters with related to strengthening the relationship between India-US trade and then commerce, as well as issues with regard to visa processing, etc. With these words, I wish the participants a very informative and productive session. So I wish all the participants, who are the members of ISCC APTS, to take advantage of these sessions. And also, if they have any questions at the end of the session, you can post to our speakers. And also, if you want to have one-to-one clarifications or guidance, or taking up any specific cases with these people, you can even interact with them, contact them, because they're also one of our members only. And then they can give a better solution to all of our problems. Now the floor is open to Raju Garu and then Raghu Babu Garu.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. Just a request to all our members and guests to kindly post their questions or any queries which they like to ask to both of the speakers in Q&A or chat, so that during question and answer session, questions can be taken from there. Thank you. I request VSS and Raju sir to kindly start.
Yeah. Thank you, Narayan Garu and Shekha, for giving this opportunity. We have, me and Raghu suggested this session because Indo-American Chamber of Commerce members mostly engaged in exports and imports, but they are also dealing with the local vendors as well as the local financial creditors. So therefore, the IBC is relevant for them also. Therefore, they should have at least what is happening in IBC and how it is working, how it can be beneficial for them and how it can work against them also. So with that thing, we have requested that we can have one seminar for the members. And me and Raghu have discussed and divided into two parts. One is that IBC, insolvency, liquidation of the corporate debtor, corporate person, that is a companies and LLPs. I will be taking it as broadly, and we'll have a question and answers. So once we complete this session, then Raghu will take on the resolution plan and pre-packed insolvency and personal guarantors. So I have a presentation which I would like to complete it as early as possible so that we can have more time for the question and answers and interactive session.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, I'll be sharing my screen.
Sure.
Yeah, hope everybody able to see my screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So what is IBC? It is called Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, which is established in, it was passed and notified on December 1st, 2016, which is a code which consolidates and amends the laws relating to reorganization and insolvency resolution of corporate persons, partnership firms, individuals in a time-bound manner for maximization of value to promote entrepreneurship, availability of credit, balance of interest of all the stakeholders. So reorganization, why reorganization? Because earlier there is a different authorities for the resolution. Like there is a SICA, that is Sikh Industries Companies Act, for the rehabilitation of the companies which were sick. Then there is a binding of proceedings under the Companies Act. And for individuals, it's an insolvency provincial insolvency act. There's a different act. So there are all different enactment for different things. So they have repealed all this and they brought in the consolidated code for the insolvency, liquidation, and bankruptcy. And there is a no time-bound process in either in a Companies Act for the winding up or a rehabilitation under the SICA. So therefore, they also got the time frame under which this either an insolvency process or a liquidation or a bankruptcy should work. So they fixed the timelines and should complete that within the timelines so that the asset will be utilized once again by the right people to generate the revenue to the state as well as for all the stakeholders. Which also promote the entrepreneurship. So the SIC industries comes into the market in a time-bound manner to take over by the new management. Also, it will generate and provide the opportunity for the entrepreneurship in the market, as well as since the new people come forward and take the property in a liquidation, the financial creditors or operational creditors realize their money, which will again put it back into the system for a better transactions in the system and create the opportunity for the all the stakeholders to create the employment as well as the profits for the corporations. Since the banks also recover the money in a quick time-bound manner, the money will go back to the recovery will happen, and again that can be come into the system. The IBC was broadly divided into three processes. One is insolvency resolution process, liquidation process, and bankruptcy. So what is the difference between insolvency, bankruptcy, and liquidation? So insolvency, basically somebody is unable to pay. As a person, I have taken a loan, but I am not able to pay. I'm not a bankrupt or I'm not a bankrupt, but I'm insolvent. Then what is the bankruptcy? Okay, I'm insolvent. I've defaulted to pay. Then there is a process in which they've approached me to settle my dues or make a payment structure, but I failed to give that scheme to pay back or make a settlement. Then I will be declared as an insolvent, bankrupt, and the bankruptcy process will start. Similarly, for a companies and LLPs, the insolvency will be conducted like a corporate insolvency resolution process will be conducted. If nobody come forward to take that company through a resolution plan, then that company will be sent to the liquidation. In the liquidation process, the liquidator will be appointed and he will sell the assets either as a going concern or on a piecemeal basis that we will see. This is the difference between the insolvency, bankruptcy, and liquidation. If it is in a corporates, companies, and LLPs, the process is insolvency first to revive the company. If there is no possibility of the revival, then it will go into the liquidation. For individuals, the insolvency will be initially to see that any settlement or a scheme can be provided to the lenders or creditors. If he is not able to do it, then it will go into the bankruptcy. So how it was evolved? Earlier we had for the individual insolvency, the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act, Provincial Insolvency Act were there, under which the person who is an insolvent used to submit the application before the civil court and get declared as a insolvent person and settle with the creditors. So that process used to take a long time to complete it. Then there is a SICA was there from 1985, under which the rehabilitation of the corporates, which are all companies which are all running the industries, industries which are falling part of the Industrial Dispute Act are eligible to file their reference before the SIC BAFR, Board for Industrial Finance and Reconstruction, and they used to deal with that. But the BAFR and all, they used to take the years time to deal with that rehabilitation thing, and the system was not able to get that much of benefit out of the SICA. Then they come up with the recovery of debt dues to banks and financial institutions, and they created a system of debt recovery tribunals. These are all mostly for the banks. So that some extent it is helped, but they did not get the result whatever that results they've expected. Then they created a SARFAESI, Securitization Act they've created, and given the powers to the creditors themselves to take the properties which are all secured in their favor, that is mortgage created in favor of the banks. Then they have the right to take over that property and sell themselves. They don't require to go to the court. But SARFAESI also given some benefit to the banks, but it is not given that whatever that desired results. So under the Companies Act, the whole winding up process was under the Companies Act earlier under 1956 and then 2013. But it is not a time bound manner. The liquidator, only official liquidator was available, and with that infrastructure, they were not able to deal with. Therefore, the central government has taken a firm decision and brought this code, IBC, Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, by repealing the Presidency Towns Insolvency Act as well as the Provincial Insolvency Act, and SICA was repealed earlier itself, and then it was amended to repeal some of the provisions and all. And they've amended the Debt Recovery Act as well as SARFAESI and Companies Act to suit that IBC under those act also. So what is that applicability, scope and structure? What is the scope, how this entire IBC will be operated? So who all comes under this IBC? So all kind of companies, very few exemptions like government authorities or companies which are doing the sovereign duty. But otherwise government companies, latest judgment is that even government companies also comes under IBC. But like Tamil Nadu government and all, they have now filed in a Supreme Court stating that the electricity boards, basically electricity companies, power generation companies and all that, even though they are registered under the Companies Act, they are doing a sovereign duty by supplying this one, they should be exempted. But otherwise government companies also comes under the IBC, and limited liability partnerships and partnership firms and individuals. The scope is that insolvency, liquidation, and even voluntary liquidation of the LLPs and companies, and then bankruptcy of the individual. The IBC code has 255 sections and 5 parts. Part 1 is basically definitions, common definitions for the entire IBC. Then part 2 consists of the various chapters, like 7 chapters. The important chapters are like corporate insolvency resolution process, how the resolution process of the corporates will happen, then how the liquidation process will happen, then pre-packed insolvency, how that will work, then voluntary liquidation, and then who are all the adjudicating authority for all this corporate insolvency or a liquidation or a bankruptcy for individuals and all that, then offenses and penalties. Then part 3 is for the individuals and partnership firms. And part 4, what are all the authorities created under this enactment? So like they've created an authority like similar to RBI or a SEBI for a security markets. They've created a authority and whatever the regulations, rules are required, they will be regularly passing them and amending them based on the requirement of the requirements, and seeing that how that effectively be implemented, and the powers and functions of the board. And the major thing is that who will conduct this CARP and liquidation or a bankruptcy. So they've created the people called insolvency professionals. Who are these insolvency professionals? So they've given a 4 or 5 criteria that these people can become an insolvency professionals, like a chartered accountant having a 10 years of experience, and a company secretary and cost accountant and advocate and management graduates are having the 10 years of experience. Then they have to appear for the exam conducted by the IBBI to qualify to be an insolvency professional. Once they pass the exam, then again they have to undergo training of a 1 week mandatory training they have to undergo. Then they have to apply for the registration. Before going to the IBBA, they created insolvency professional agencies. And they've recognized some of the agencies like Chartered Accountancy Agency, they have one agency, and Company Secretary Institute have one agency. All these insolvency professionals have to register through these agencies to the IBBA. So if I wanted to be an insolvency professional, I had to go to this one of this agency and get registered myself with them. Then they will forward my application to IBBA to get registered. And then IBBA qualify me as an insolvency professional. And they give me that the practice certificate, which will be valid for 5 years and which I have to every year renew it to take the assignments. And that certificate, I have to show it to the adjudicating authority, NCLT, to get appointed as an insolvency professional. Then they've created information utilities. Information utilities, again, like we have that CDSL, NSDL, like that. So where that creditors, once they create any default or anything, they have to register with this information utilities. So there's a process, the information utilities do that once any creditor report that there is a default, then they'll issue the notices to the corporate debtor to get the authentication from the corporate debtor. If the corporate debtor don't react to those mails and don't authenticate, still they show it as authenticated by not giving the reply. So why they created this information utilities is that the code, under the code, once any application is filed before the adjudicating authority, then the application has to be admitted within 14 days. So therefore, if it is an information utility already recorded as a default is done by the corporate debtor, the adjudicating authority can go by that information utility certification and admit the case. But that still it's not happening. It is, they made it some time back a mandatory that the creditors who are filing it has to produce that certificate from the information utilities, but it is still, as of now, there is a stay against that. Therefore, that still is not happening. Then finance and accounts and miscellaneous sections. The important sections under miscellaneous are that the section 238, under that 238, they've given a overriding power of IBC against all other laws. Like if something is contradictory between the Income Tax Act and IBC, then IBC will override that act. Similarly, if any PF Act, Provident Fund Act, and IBC have a contradictory, IBC will have an overriding effect to all the laws. And also they have later on amended to bring that limitation aspect also, that all these proceedings which the creditors going to file it before the adjudicating authority should be filed within the limitation period. And they said that limitation act will applicable for the IBC so that we can avoid that all that claims are whatever that amounts due, which are all out of the limitation, and the limitation fixed is 3 years. Because the Limitation Act does not have the specific limitation period for the insolvency and all that. The residual clause which provides for the 3 years has been declared as a limitation by the Supreme Court through various judgments. Therefore, any application to be filed before NCLT should be filed within 3 years of the default. Then the schedules, 11 schedules, under that schedules, they have amended the various acts like Income Tax Act, Debt Recovery Tribunal Act, Recovery of Debts Act, and the SURFACE Act. All these acts were amended through the schedules. Then who are the authorities as per the IBC? So regulator, we have already discussed that the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, which is IBBA, which is regulatory for the IBC, which will regulate the insolvency professional agencies as well as the insolvency professionals and insolvency professional enterprises. What is this insolvency professional enterprise? Is basically formed by the enterprise formed by all the insolvency professionals to support the insolvency professional who was appointed as a resolution professional. Because if somebody is like me, has been appointed as a insolvency resolution professional for a large company which is having so much of turnover and so many assets, as an individual, I cannot do the whole process. To support me, I require a qualified people and having the knowledge in the in the insolvency process, and as well as the operations, accounts, taxation, all sort of expertise is required to run the company. Because once the resolution professional is appointed, he has to ensure that the company is run as a going concern. Therefore, to support that insolvency professional, the IBB has allowed the insolvency professionals to form enterprise which will support the insolvency professional. Then the registered valuers system also they got in. Earlier, we used to have the valuers who are registered with the Income Tax Act. Normally, those people were used for the purpose of getting the valuations out by the banks and all that. Now they have brought in that registered valuers. The IBBA will conduct an exam for the registered valuers or whoever is qualified, then they will be registered with the IBBA as a registered valuers. These people will be utilized for the purpose of the doing the valuations under the insolvency process and the liquidation process. Then information utilities we have already discussed. Then adjudicators. Who are the adjudicators for the entire process under the IBC? There are two adjudicating processes were defined here. One is that National Company Law Tribunal. National Company Law Tribunal was an adjudicator for corporate persons. Corporate persons includes companies and as well as the LLPs. Debt Recovery Tribunal is the adjudicating authority for the individuals and partnership firms. Then later on, the IBC was amended to bring that the personal guarantors who was given a guarantee to the corporate debtor, then they will become under the NCLT. Why they made this is that the corporate debtor is already before the NCLT and undergoing the insolvency process, and the banks or creditors have a right to file against the personal guarantors, can come under the same authority instead of going into the different authority. So therefore, the same authority will have a control on the borrower as well as the guarantors. But who are the individuals who are not given guarantees, or the which are all companies not gone into the CARP are not filed before the NCLT. For a partnership firm, the authority is a debt recovery tribunal. But this debt recovery tribunal that is not yet started the operations of individual and partnership firms insolvency before the DRT, but the NCLTs are started taking the applications since December 1st, 2019 against personal guarantors to the corporate persons, corporate debtors. So some important decisions. Who is the financial creditor? Financial creditor means any person to whom financial debt is owed and includes a person to whom such debt has been legally assigned or transferred to. So basically financial debt, so normally they put it that there's a time value for the money. That is one of the critical, seeing that the financial debt. Then who's the assigned and transferred? Because these banks are assigning it to the asset reconstruction companies through a Securitization Act. They are also covered under the financial creditor. Or some individual, I have given a loan to somebody, but I assign my rights to somebody. He is also covered under the financial creditors. And who are all the operational creditors? Operational creditor means a person to whom an operational debt is owed and includes any person to whom such debt has been legally assigned or transferred. The operational debt, basically the other than the financial creditors, most of the creditors comes under the operational debt. Operational debt occurs in view of the services provided to the corporate debtor or by way of providing the goods. I have do a supply to the corporate debtor. For example, I have supplied a cement, but he has not paid money. I will come under the operational creditor. As a service provider, I give a digital services to some company and I raise invoice, but he failed to pay back to me. So I provided service and he is defaulted to me. So I will also comes under the operational debtor. Corporate debtor means corporate person who owes a debt to any person. Corporate debtor is a corporate person. Corporate person includes companies and LLPs. So what is corporate insolvency resolution process? How it will start and what is the trigger for that? So in that, they've divided into three parts. One is that the financial creditors can directly file it before the NCLT. Similarly, operational creditor also can go ahead and file it before the NCLT. And corporate debtor, if I feel that I have defaulted, I myself go and file a application before the NCLT. Then what is the criteria for filing the application? If it is in a financial creditor, I need to establish before the NCLT that the corporate debtor has defaulted making the payment to me. I need to establish that I have given money to him and he is supposed to pay to me on so and so date and he failed to pay. That itself is sufficient for the application to be admitted before the NCLT. The corporate debtor cannot take a plea that no, he is wrongly charged me, or he is there are so many issues on that, and all that will not be considered. Even though there is a dispute between the corporate debtor and financial creditor, still the application can be admitted. With respect to the operational creditor, before filing an application before the NCLT, the operational creditor needs to issue a notice to the corporate debtor in a prescribed form. They prescribed the form. Under that form, they need to issue a notice to the corporate debtor stating that I have supplied or I have given a services and this is the amount is payable and you have failed to pay. Please pay this amount within 10 days, failing which I will go and file an application before the NCLT. So once the corporate debtors receive that notice, he need to give back a reply to the operational creditor stating that, yes, you have supplied a goods, but there is a dispute about the goods or that the quantity or a quality of that, which I have already raised it. Therefore, there is a dispute between you and me, or otherwise there is no dispute. You already paid, corporate debtor already paid. We can say that I've already paid. Therefore, you are not entitled to file it before the NCLT. So based on once that reply, then he can go and operational creditor go and file it before the NCLT. Then NCLT look into the aspect of two things. One is that whether the debt is due, whether there is a debt, whether the operational creditor supplied goods or services and operational credit, the corporate debtor availed it, whether they said default. Plus, is there any dispute? The NCLT will check that if the corporate debtor is claiming that there is a dispute, whether any dispute is there, pre-existing dispute is there, or a pre-existing litigation is there, arbitration proceedings are there, or with the same subject, the parties already before the court. All this will be examined by the NCLT before admitting that. If the NCLT come to the conclusion that yes, there is a debt and there is no dispute, the NCLT will admit the application of the operational creditor. So with respect to the filing of application by the corporate debtor, the NCLT will look at that, is there any lenders or creditors, whether the creditor has given money to him, the corporate debtor, and whether corporate debtor defaulted in paying to the creditors. They look at only default. So for financial creditor application under section 7 and corporate debtor application under section 10, the adjudicating authority will look into only default. With respect to operational creditors, they will look into the default as well as the dispute. This is the major difference between the application filed with the financial creditor and corporate debtor and the application filed with the operational creditor. Then what will be the process? Once the NCLT prima facie is decided that there is a default, and they will admit the application and appoint an interim resolution professional from the list of the IBBA who are all the insolvency professionals, or otherwise if the creditor, like financial creditor, can recommend that the name of the insolvency professional to be appointed as an insolvency professional. So they will, if the financial creditor recommend, normally the adjudicating authority take that name and appoint that person. If there is no name is recommended, then they have a IBBA certified the list, then who are all qualified to be appointed. From that list, they will take it and appoint an insolvency professional as an interim resolution professional. And also important aspect is that along with that appointment, they will also declare a moratorium against the corporate debtor from the date of admission. What it means is that once the moratorium is issued by the NCLT, no party can take any coercive measures against that corporate debtor. So it will get an immunity. So that the insolvency professional can run and as a going concern and try to see that there is a insolvency resolution process can be run and a resolution plan can be obtained from the interested parties so that it can be revived. See, other important aspect is that the moment the CARP application is admitted and IRP is appointed, the powers of the board of directors and partners will be suspended. So they cannot, they will be board of directors, they will be directors, but they will not have any powers. So all powers will go to the different authority, which we will discuss it. So once the IRP was appointed, he will issue a notice, a public notice to the general public through a power publication stating that the company has been admitted to by the NCLT or adjudicating authority for the corporate CARP, and he will call for the claims from all the stakeholders, either a financial creditor, operational creditor, government, whoever having the claims, all of them has to respond to his public notice and file their claims before him within the stipulated time. Then the IRP will collate all the claims. He will not adjudicate the claims. He will collate the claims. He will see that, okay, you give it, somebody files a claim, then he will look into the claim and see that the books, in the CD books, whether that claim is appearing or not, whether there is an admission of that claim or there is a dispute of that claim. He will examine that and collate the claim. If it is everything tallying, he will admit that claim and send a reply to that person who has filed it, saying that, yes, I have admitted your claim. If he is not able to see that it is not recorded in the books of the CD, then he will reject the claim. If he rejects the claim, the party which has filed a claim and IRP has rejected it, then they have a right to go to NCLT challenging the decision of the resolution professional about the admission of their claim. Again, that is a time-bound manner. Within 30 days, they have to file it before the NCLT. So apart from that, the IRP or RP, after collating all these claims, the IRP or RP have any doubts about the preferential or undervalued or extortionate credits or fraudulent transactions, then he will make his opinion based on the audit, forensic audit conducted. Then he will file an application before the NCLT reporting all these preferential, undervalued, extortionate credits, and go back period is fixed as a 2 years. So he has to examine for the last 2 years what are all the preferential transactions done by the corporate debtor and then report it to the adjudicating authority for reversing them. With respect to fraudulent transactions, there is no time frame. So we can see that if it is more than 2 years also, but he should have a solid documentary proof to prove that there is a fraudulent transaction. So once he receives all these claims, he will look into that how many financial creditors have come and how many operational creditors have come, how much is the government claims. All this he will collate it and report it to the adjudicating authority. And then he also create an important body for the CARP is called Committee of Creditors. Committee of Creditors, popularly known as a COC. See, who are all the members of the COC? The members of the COC will be financial creditors. financial creditors will have a voting right under the COC. Apart from the financial creditors, the ex-management also will be part of the COC, but they don't have any right to vote on any agenda items. They'll be observers and they can give their suggestions. They can cooperate with the COC and financial creditors. Apart from that, if the operational debt of the entire, all the operational creditors are more than 10% of the entire debt, then one of the operational creditor also get a representative seat in the COC, but he will not have any vote. The only financial creditors will have a right to vote under the COC. So what happening under the IBC, the major change is that the management of the corporate debtor will move from the debtor to a creditors. Instead of debtor running the company, creditors going to run the company. Once the COC is constituted through resolution professional. The resolution professional can take decisions with respect to certain aspects, but majority of the aspects, he need to take a approval from the COC. So like payments to be made to various people, critical agreements to be entered into with the different parties, and he require an interim finance. All this has to be go to the COC, and the COC has to approve all these aspects of the corporate data. Once he constitute the COC and he do the valuation of all the assets, what the assets the CD has, and then he also look into the claims, then he will prepare an information memorandum and present it to the COC, and along with that information memorandum, he also prepares an expression of interest and put it before the COC to look into the aspects that how should we call for the resolution applicants who can come forward and take this company to run it take it forward as a going concern. So this expression of interest or request for the bids, RFRP, consists of all the information of the company and also agreements, assets, litigations, all that will be given it under this expression of interest along with the RFRP, and data room will be created and the notification will be issued in the newspapers calling for the resolution applicants. So in the expression of interest or RFRP, also they will define that what is the evaluation matrix. If somebody come and file an application, resolution application or a plan, resolution plan, how it will be calculated, how the marks will be given it. If it is a 10 people come and give the different way how they wanted to revive this company, then how it will be valued. It will be, there should be a matrix that how the resolution professional will calculate the points also will be given in the expression of interest or RFRP. So once he receive the resolution plans, he will evaluate all that based on the evaluation matrix and present it to the COC. So once it is presented to the COC, COC will call for all the resolution applicants and see that based on that their eligibility and the matrix, and they have a right to renegotiate with those people. And then the resolution plan, whichever having the highest marks, will be put it for the voting by the COC members who are having the voting rights. Then they will exercise the voting right based on their commercial wisdom. The commercial wisdom is very, very important point in the IBC, which is upheld by the Supreme Court. Because the creditors have known the facts of the company and they know the value of the assets, they know the value of the business because they evaluated while funding the company, all these aspects. Therefore, their commercial wisdom is the more important in the CARP process. They can exercise their commercial wisdom and vote it. for the resolution plan. Once the resolution plan gets more than 66% of the entire percentage, then the resolution professional has to file an application before the NCLT, that is adjudicating authority, for approval of the resolution plan. Then once he filed the application, the role of the adjudicator is very limited, because the already COC has exercised its commercial wisdom and gone through all the aspects of the commercial aspects. So it will look into the aspects of whether this resolution plan has complied with the insolvency bankruptcy code, like whether provided for the CARP cost, one of the important aspects, whether they provided for the payment to the operational creditor as per the liquidation value. So like that, there are certain parameters they will look into, that whether this resolution plan is complied with those parameters. Once it is provided, the adjudicating authority will approve the resolution plan. Once the resolution plan is approved, the plan will be binding on the corporate debtor, ex-management, the state government, central government, creditors, and everyone who are all involved with that corporate debtor. After approval of the resolution, somebody cannot come, no, I forgot to file my claim. Now I will file it, my claim, you have to pay my claim. Then that is not possible. Because the Supreme Court very clearly said, once resolution plan is approved, the resolution applicant is not bound to pay any single pay more than what he committed under the resolution plan. So that way, the company, the resolution applicant who's taking the company through a CRP process is very clear about how much amount he's paying it and how much money will be going to them, to each people, and money will be put it before the monitoring committee will be constituted under the resolution plan, and monitoring committee will pass on this money to the stakeholders, also see that resolution plan is implemented. If the resolution plan is not in compliance with the section 30, that is what the compliance has to be done under the IBC, or there is no resolution plan received by the insolvency professional, then the company will be sent into the liquidation. Then the adjudicating authority or NCLT will appoint a liquidator and say that the company going for the liquidator, and it will appoint the same RP can be appointed as a liquidator, or it can be changed. If the creditors wants to change have a new liquidator, they can recommend a liquidator, or otherwise from the list of IBBA, they will take one of the qualified insolvency professional, appoint him as a liquidator. Once the liquidator is appointed, he will form the liquidation estate. He will see that all the records of the company, what all assets are there and all that, and he will form that, okay, this is the asset of the corporate debtor. He will also issue again a public announcement stating that, yes, now I am appointed as a liquidator. I'm going to liquidate this company. Please, whoever having the claims, please come forward and file your claims before me. And he will adjudicate the claim. The RP don't adjudicate the claim. He collate the claims, but liquidator adjudicate as a quasi-judicial authority. He's a quasi-judicial authority. He will adjudicate the claim and admit the claims or reject the claim. If it is rejected, or liquidator reject the claim, the parties whose claim is rejected have again an opportunity to file an appeal before the NCLT. Then he determine and he will create who are all the stakeholders involved, how much money the company owes to all the stakeholders, and he will also create a stakeholder consultation committee. It is similar to a committee of creditors, but this stakeholder constitution committee don't have any voting rights, or they don't run the company. The company is completely run by the liquidator, and he is in charge for the corporate debtor. The stakeholder committee only give advices, but that advice also is not binding on the liquidator. He can take advice from them, but he can differ with their advice with whatever reasoning has having it. He can record that reasoning and say that they are giving this advice, but this is the reasons I'm not taking their advice. I'm going forward like this. So therefore, once it gets into the liquidation, then the liquidator will be the person who is going to run the entire liquidation proceedings. Only stakeholder committee only for to give the advice, and the liquidator has to consult them. And then once he have the liquidation estate and he sure that how much, what all assets he need to sell, then he need to do a major thing, that whether he will sell it as a going concern or a business as a going concern. So before going to the liquidation, COC can recommend saying that once if it goes to a liquidation, this should be this shall be sold as a going concern. They can recommend and they can pass a resolution that will be binding on the liquidator to sell the company as a going concern, and he have an obligation to sell the company for 90 days from the date of liquidation to sell as a going concern. In the going concern or business as a going concern, the liquidator will ascertain the assets and say that this is the assets or this is the licenses, this is the intellectual property rights the company having it. I'm going to sell all of them as a going concern, and all the liabilities will remain with the liquidator. So it is similar to a resolution plan. Whatever that resolution applicant get, here also all that whatever that is there with the company, the whoever person buys it in the liquidation will get it as a going concern along with the company. Company will not be dissolved, and company also they will get it. But the major difference between the resolution plan and buying in the liquidation is the payment structure. In the resolution plan, you can give a payment structure stating that, okay, I'll give X percent, 10% or 15% in 10 days, and 20% in 1 year, another 15% in 2 years, and the entire 100% I'll pay in 5 years. But in liquidation process, you cannot say that. You have to pay the entire consideration within 90 days. But again, within 30 days, after 30 days, whatever payments you make, again, you need to pay the interest of 12%. And liquidator don't have any power to extend more than 90 days. If anybody buys an asset under the liquidation and fails to pay money within 90 days, the liquidator don't have any authority, he will forfeit it. Or otherwise, you need to go to the NCLT and get an extension from the NCLT. So then once he disposes of the assets, he gets the money and then he distributes it. But he fails to get any buyer for as a going concern or a business as a going concern, then he will get into the different mode of sale. That is either by way of a slump sale or asset piecemeal basis. All sort of ways he can sell it. So that the maximization is that he has to keep in mind that otherwise he can sell all that ways. Slump sale, he can sell it, piecemeal basis, standalone basis, all such things he can sell it and get the money, recover all that money and keep it with him for the distribution. Then how do he distribute it? The IBC is very clear about how he has to distribute it under section 53, which is popularly known as a waterfall mechanism. So like the water will flow from the top, how the money will be paid it from top to bottom. The foremost importance will be given it to the cost. Once the CARP is admitted, from there whatever the cost spent by the insolvency professional, resolution professional, which is funded by the COC or creditors, and the liquidation cost will be taken out first. So later on, the money will be given it to the secured creditors plus workmen for the 24 months of their preceding liquidation period. Salaries and whatever their entitlement will be paid in a pari passu basis. Both of them should be given on a pari passu basis. Pari passu means equal proportionate basis. It has to be given it. If theirs is 100 rupees, this is 10 rupees. 100 is to 10. That will be distributed. After distribution to the workmen and secured creditors, if any money is left over, that will go to the wages of the employees. Other than workmen will come under after these two categories. And after paying them also, if there is any money is left over, that will be paid to the unsecured creditors. Even after say unsecured creditors are satisfied, then they have to pay to the central government and state government dues. That is like sales tax dues, income tax dues, GST dues, all that will come under the central and state government dues. Along with that, secured creditors are for an unrealized amount for enforcing the security interest. They have relinquished their security and given it to the liquidator, but still they have got some money, but they did not get the more other money. Still the secured creditor needs to get some more money, then he can pay along with the central government and pari passu to them. Later on, if any money is there, any other debts which are not comes under these categories will be paid. After that, if any preferential shareholders are there to the company, it will be paid to preferential shareholder. Still money is left over, then it will be paid to the equity shareholders. This way, the liquidator will distribute the money, and then he will file an application for dissolution of the company. So this is the insolvency process and liquidation of the corporate debtor and LLP. And now we thought we'll discuss that how it can take advantage instead of recovery. We have said recovery, but the IBC is not provided not for the recovery. How do you take it an advantage of the insolvency and bankruptcy code by the companies? So the advantage is that if you're a financial creditor, straight away go and file it before the NCLAT. But if it is the company don't have assets, don't have any means to pay this cost of CARP and all that, then that is not advantageous to. So you should assess that if you're a financial creditor, you should assess that whether, or even for an operational creditor also, you have to see that whether the company is in a position to pay, or they are doing a good, but they are avoiding payment purposefully to me in one reason or other. So that I can, if I file my application before NCLT, since they are doing good, having money to pay, but avoiding due to that different reasons, then definitely they will come forward and settlement. Then you should go and file it before the NCLT. It is not that every case you go and file it before the NCLT. If the company don't have any assets, they don't have any money with the company, if you go and file it before the NCLT, you will not recover any money. And instead, if you are in a financial creditor, you have to pay the cost of the insolvency process. Therefore, it is advantageous if the corporate debtor doing good, having the money, purposefully avoiding your money, then you should go and file it before the NCLT. And you also has to see that how you negotiate. Once you file it, how do you negotiate with the corporate debtor to get the maximum amount recovery from that? But once it is admitted, is it a dead end for you? No. Even it is admitted, the application has been admitted by the adjudicating authority, still you can make a settlement. If it is within 30 days of the CARP admission, before constituting the committee of creditors, if the financial creditor, operational creditor, and corporate debtor can settle it and give an application to the insolvency resolution professional, he can go and file it before the NCLT and get this insolvency resolution, the order can be recalled. After 30 days of the admission, before constituting COC, the settlement can be done. Is it that is the end? No. Even after constitution of the COC also, the corporate debtor can be settled with the applicant, whoever is filed an application. But the condition is that the COC, who are having the voting rights, 90% of the creditors, financial creditor having the voting rights, has to agree for the withdrawal of the CARP process. So after COC also, it can be withdrawn. It can be settled. Till before the liquidation process, there is an opportunity for the withdrawal. But however, once he called for a expression of interest and issue an RFRP, And if we receive some resolution plans, and at that point of time, the committee of creditors and IRP needs to give the reasons why they are withdrawing it to the NCLT. Then NCLT should satisfy that, okay, we are agreeing to these reasons and we are recalling the CARP. But once the resolution plan is approved, then it cannot be recalled. The settlement cannot be done. The resolution plan, once it's approved, it cannot be withdrawn. But again, there is no resolution plan. It goes to a liquidation. Then again, the promoters of the company have an opportunity under Section 230 to a settlement among the stakeholders and the ex-management or creditors within 90 days of passing of the liquidation order. So there are 3 or 4 instances where after admission out to the CARP also settlement can be done. If the company having the money or assets backed to service the creditors, definitely settlement can be done and money can be recovered. How to avoid getting into insolvency? If it is a financial creditor, it is very clear. It's a default is there, then the NCLT will admit. So it's always better to have a good relationship with the financial creditors and talk to them, get that extended, the default. If it is even though default happened, they get it extended, do some settlement, some scheme, you can do it. All that you can do it and avoid it going into the insolvency. But with respect to the operational creditors, so most of the people who receives an application from the notice from the operational creditors, because of the unawareness, they don't even reply to that notice. So they have to issue a reply notice to the operational creditor if we issue a notice under the IBC. Apart from the issuing it, it is better practice in the company to create it as and when there is a issue with the supply or a service, raise the dispute immediately and put the dispute in writing by way of emails, by way of a correspondence of the letters. Therefore, the dispute can be exist with that operational creditor, even though issue a notice under the IBC for going into CARP. So we can reply stating that there is a pre-existing dispute, and even you go ahead and file it before the NCLT, we can go and prove that there is a dispute. This cannot be admitted. But if there is a dispute, there is a issue of service, quality of goods or a service, but we are keep on discussing over phone, not put it on paper, we don't raise it. And once we receive the notice also, we don't reply to that. Then once you get into the NCLT, that point of time, will be worried and go into the NCLT, then it's very difficult to succeed in the NCLT because you have never raised any dispute. It is very easy to show that there is a debt and there is no dispute unless you raise it that the dispute is there. Because dispute is there, there is no debt. Even there is a debt, that debt is not, is that what he claims? It is lower than that. If it is lower than that, you can pay that whatever that you are admitting, you can pay it and say that this is the balance is under dispute. So therefore, the corporates should be very vigilant when they are doing the business with this operational creditors, so that you can avoid the insolvency. There are few judgments, just want to show that which are all given the constitutional validity to the IBC. This is Swiss Ribbon case, which is given the validity, and Supreme Court upheld the IBC and said all the provisions of the IBC are valid and constitutional. And the Innovative Industries versus ICICI Bank case, wherein the Supreme Court said that yes, financial creditors are the people, even though there is a dispute also, once that there is a default, it can be admitted. And the creditors know that they've funded the company, the COC can do the entire management of that. Then Mobilex case, is again a Supreme Court case with respect to the operational creditors. So how the dispute has to be read by the NCLT, whether there is any hypothetical or illusive disputes people can create to avoid that need not require to be looked into it. And NCLT cannot get into the dispute and see that. Just they have to see the dispute, whether there's a dispute or not. Then SR Steel and Satish Kumar Gupta case, the Supreme Court's given that supremacy to the COC, that their commercial wisdom is the key for the IBC. So these are all the Supreme Court judgments. Just I want to bring it to your notice. With this, I would like to thank all of you for the patient listening, and we can open to the Q&A now. Thank you. Over to Shekha.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for such a detailed representation and detailed presentation and so much information about the painful areas, which are really the corporates require the information about that. And actually, there are 2-3 members have put a question that can they have the copy of the presentation? So we'll take permission from the speakers and we can share if it is fine.
Yeah, one is that whether will we receive a recording of this webinar? I think you can answer it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Second,
we are recording the webinar, and we can share the YouTube link. And if we'll take permission from the speakers, if it is fine, then we'll share the PPTs also, and we'll share the contact details of both the speakers.
Yeah, you can do that. The
Sure.
other one, is there any incident in India from Presidency Towns insolvency to IBC? Any equity shareholders charged for payment of debts? I think Raghu wants to answer this. Raghu, you can go ahead and answer this.
So over to you, Raghu Babu sir.
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening, friends. I think, I mean, say equity shareholders paying interest, I don't think that is possible. Even I have not come across any incidents of that nature.
So equity, basically equity shareholders are their liability to the company is limited to the whatever that the face value or whatever that the company issues the share. Their liability is limited to that extent. If it is a 10 rupees face value of the share, then their liability is restricted to the 10 rupees. That is why it is a company. Companies are limited companies. Their liability is limited. Equity shareholders. In case of LLPs, the partners' liability also limited. That is why that is a new structure has been created, that limited liability partnerships. So any other questions? I think one more question we have.
I mean, Raju, what my suggestion is, why don't I finish my presentation also, then we can take all the questions?
Yeah, I think one question is
Sure.
let me complete this. After the liquidation process of a company is done, banks can go to invoke personal guarantee of promoters. However, is it a time-bound process? Yes, after CARP or a liquidation process, if any residual debt is still there, the banks can go against the personal guarantor, and they can file the insolvency proceedings under the Section 95. This is upheld in the SR Steel case. The right of subrogation, see, normally under the Indian Contract Act, once the principal borrower is discharged, automatically the guarantors also get discharged. But under the IBC, even the personal principal borrower is discharged. There is a corporate debtor is discharged under the insolvency process or a liquidation, but the guarantors are not discharged. The residual debt can be recovered from the personal guarantors, which is upheld by the Supreme Court in the SR Steel matter. So therefore, the banks have entitled to recover the balance amount from the personal guarantors. Yeah, Raghu, you can take over. Hope I have answered to the Parag Mule's question.
Shall I go ahead, Shika?
Yes, sir, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Raju sir.
Yeah. Very good evening, friends. Thank you for IACC for giving me this opportunity. Mr. Rao and Shika and my other friends who are in the participants, and also Mr. Raju, who VVS and Raju is a good friend of mine who has elaboratedly covered this subject. I mean, as a second speaker, you also have an advantage. You can speak less. First speaker, anyhow, generally overshots his time. So that way, I'm also a little bit advantage position. I mean, this topic is very vast, and 2 hours is not sufficient. But idea is to give a flavor of how this topic and insolvency and bankruptcy code, how it affects the corporates, and I mean that is the context at which we wanted to cover this topic. And I mean, he gave a complete landscape how this IBC framework works. I wanted to focus more on the corporate resolution from if you are a you are a corporate looking to acquire a company going through resolution, or a company which is going through the resolution. I mean, I wanted to spend most of my time on this topic, and maybe a little bit we will spend on personal, what is happening to the personal guarantors. And then there is also a new concept called pre-PAC, insolvency resolution. I think it is now 5:15. Maybe I'll take 30 minutes or so, and then maybe we will leave 15 minutes for the Q&A session. Before I get into topic, I also want to add a couple of things from the little bit conceptually what has happened. In 2016, this law came. I mean, before that, I mean, as Raju said, there were a number of legislations. The one challenge we had was the huge amount of delay in resolving the insolvency companies. I mean, it was taking a lot of time, 3, 4, 5, 10 years. So the government thought, we should have a very, very speedy resolution of insolvency. That's where this law came with a fantastic fanfare. And, I mean, we all were very, very excited. I mean, the way law was drafted and brought into force and, started working. This legislation alone gave, close to 30, 40 better rankings in the world, ease of doing business rankings in 2017 and 2018, just because of the IBC. I mean, that's where we started. And just to add a couple of fundamental things which have changed the way insolvency operates in India. One is the test for insolvency has undergone change. The whole test for insolvency has undergone change. Earlier, it used to be, the net worth based. If entire net worth is eroded, then you would become an insolvent company. Then there is a process to be followed. From a net worth erosion, we have moved to a cash flow based test. I mean, world over, I mean, the cash flows are more important today than your top line, your bottom line. Whether are you making cash out of your business is more important. So cash flow based test has been inserted. If you are not able to pay debt to a particular creditor for more than 1 crore of rupees, then there is an issue. I mean, maybe it will get into an insolvency. Therefore, we should address. That's where this test has been brought in. The second most important, which again very, very path breaking, we adopted from the West. The control moving from the promoters and management who have borrowed money, who have not been able to service, where the situation has come to the stage, it goes to the creditors. Control moving from the existing management and CD to the creditors. I mean, that's again very, very path breaking, and which has definitely brought in lot of behavioral change in the promoters. And initially for 2017, 2018, and there was it's a jolt to a lot of non-performing companies and management that if you don't perform, if you are not able to pay your creditors, control is going to go out of your hands. First time in the Indian independence, the control has moved from the equity owners to somebody who is to the creditors. I mean, that's gave a big jolt. This was the second important thing. The third important thing was the speed at which government wanted to implement this insolvency resolution process. I mean, in a way, in the insolvency, bankruptcy, and all. I mean, if one has to compare, like a human being on the deathbed or in the ICU. I mean, whatever is needed for this human being, we put everything what is required to see that to bring back to normalcy. That's how speed is very, very important. If there is a bit of a delay, there could be danger to the human being. Similarly, even for the insolvency, we don't diagnose properly and treat them properly. There could be a danger. That's where the importance of speedy resolution was very, very important. That's where the law came out with a fantastic timelines. It said if once a creditor files within 14 days, this has to be admitted into insolvency. In 180 days or maybe another 90 days, in 270 days, it has to be resolved, whether it can get resolved or it should go into the liquidation. This is the third very important feature. And fourth fourth feature was the, in the either in the insolvency or in the liquidation, whatever money which is remaining, how it has to be distributed. I mean, earlier traditionally government dues had a priority, whether the workers gets or not, whether the secured lenders gets it or not, whether anybody gets it or not, your income tax dues has to be paid first, your GST has to be paid first. That was the setup we were in. But in again this new legislation, government dues have taken a back seat. First it is the secured lenders and pari passu with the workers dues and all that, which is again very, very path breaking. I mean, that's how we started, and it was a great start. The whole architecture, entire, what you call the like NCLT, all of this, whole so much of ecosystem got evolved in next, 3-4 years. Governments also have made lot of amendments to meet the requirements. That's how it started. I mean, starting has been fantastic. The mantra was the speed. We will see little later. What is the current status? Maybe I'll conclude at the end. That's how we started, and the behavioral change itself has helped recovery to a lot of banks and to the operational creditors. That's how we started. I mean, that's how the, fundamentally things have changed. And I mean, any creditor can file this application. After that, the company gets admitted into the corporate insolvency. It's called CARP. Once that starts, there are few things which happens. As I said, the control moves from the existing management to the creditors. I mean, committee of creditors, and supported by the resolution professional like me, who's also in a insolvency professional, and who does the resolution work. I mean, last 4 years have done close to 10 resolutions. Maybe I also want to share 1 or 2 specific matters how we have dealt with it. So the control moves from the existing management to the COC, and the resolution professional. This is one. Second, the powers get suspended. The most important is there is a moratorium. As we discussed, I mean, situation is very bad. You cannot continue to trouble this legal entity with the recovery process. You don't have a breathing time. When there is no breathing time, if you punish them for a recovery, this month's EMI has to be paid, monthly installment has to be paid, you have to service all of this. You may not be able to bring back the CD into the normalcy. That's where it said, as long as companies going through the insolvency process, there is a moratorium on all recovery proceedings. There cannot be any recovery from this corporate debtor as long as there is a company is in the corporate insolvency. No bank can recover, no government can recover. There is a status quo there is a stay on the recovery in a way. And also, it also protects in terms of whatever essential services that are required for this corporate debtor should be continued. They should not be unplugged. You have there is a particular raw material supplier, or there is a factory you are running, there is a factory premises, rent has to be paid. Nobody can unplug just because you are in the insolvency. Whole purpose is lost. Idea is protect and give oxygen and bring back in 6 to 9 months to normalcy. Get a new buyer, so that there is a new lease of life can be given. I mean, this is how the whole protection is given, to see that in 6 to 9 months this company gets resolved and comes back and takes a normal shape. So once the company gets admitted into insolvency, it is a kind of an irreversible process. There are very, very few options available. One, I mean, once the COC is formed, and as a corporate debtor, you want to settle, 90% of the COC members have to consent. Only then you can come out of the insolvency process. I mean, it's not a good situation, right? Anybody going through an insolvency, it's not from a credibility perspective. I mean, so many other things. I mean, you must have observed Oyo got admitted into insolvency. I mean, 2-3 months back. Some of you would have seen that newspaper coverage. Maybe some operator, they were required to pay money, they have not paid, and it got admitted. And I mean, it was a I don't know what went wrong. Maybe management did not pay attention to casually. Company got admitted. I mean, after that 2-3 weeks, they have to struggle to get the stay. I mean, the consequence of insolvent at getting admitted into insolvency are very, very, very severe. So once you get it admitted, you don't have except the withdrawal, where you require a 90% of creditors approval in the committee of creditors. All members in the committee of creditors are the financial creditors. So you have passed that that phase. Then there are only two outcomes. One outcome is there is a resolution. The company should get resolved and then go to a new buyer or a new resolution applicant. If that fails, if there is no resolution process, then it goes into the liquidation. Now look at.
Sorry, sir. Sorry to interfere. The PPT is not moving, sir.
Yeah, so I have slides, but not necessarily I'm going by slides. I mean,
Okay.
I'm fine to continue this way.
Sure. Right, sir.
Thanks. Yeah. So now let us look at the resolution process. Who can buy company in the insolvency? What it offers. While when the law was made, I mean, we were not thought about people coming from backdoor. The existing defaulters can participate in this. There are defaulters who have defaulted in company X can come and buy assets here. That's where the government quickly realized that the existing promoters who have defaulted should not come and acquire their own asset. That's where there are qualifying requirements which came in as a negative. Somebody who is insolvent, somebody who is a defaulter, somebody where their existing debt has become an NPA, they are not eligible to participate to acquire their own assets. So that's how the eligibility has been created. And again, it's all, you learn, and then there is a new challenge. You try to figure out what is also happening. I mean, I keep saying this from an Indian context. A lot of our companies, large companies, including listed, they're all promoter driven. I mean, institutional capital and institutionally driven and professionally driven companies are very, very, very few. Even companies with 1,000 crores, it's all run like a little bit of a proprietary concern or a family run companies. If they go out, is there a value left in the corporate data? Is ineligibility conditions are so severe that the more companies are going into liquidation. Now the ineligibility also, I mean, it's a very, very vast criteria which they have put in. I mean, the condition is there is a default, but default could be genuine reason. Default could be market conditions, right? I mean, there are a lot of power companies, gas-based power companies. I mean, there is nothing fault of those promoters. The gas is not available and the PPAs have not been signed, and their own money which has been at stake, but all of them, they have become default. All of them have become an NPA. Should they be punished? I don't think, right? I mean, there are culprits. Maybe there are some people who are misusing, and maybe there is a siphoning and all of that. Definitely they should be punished. They should not be eligible to participate in the resolution process. But where the genuine reasons for the default are beyond their control because of the market reasons, I don't think they should be punished. I mean, then if you start punishing them, the entrepreneurship itself is a challenge. Idea is not to kill the entrepreneurship. So that is where government again quickly realized that we should have a leeway to the MSME promoters. If the MSME promoters, I mean, those companies which are MSMEs, and they are eligible to participate in their own assets, as long as there is no intentional siphoning of funds and all those kind of things, with little bit conditions and hygiene conditions, they were allowed. That is how the eligibility conditions came in. And when when this resolution process goes on, the whole idea of this resolution process is to give a clean slate to the buyer. This whole mechanism is to ensure when the buyer comes and participates, he will get clean slate. He knows what assets he is taking and what liabilities are there, what amount is paying, whom it goes. The legacy or the negative impact or the contingent liabilities, none of them should come to the resolution applicant, the buyer, and is the intention. I mean, if everything is getting dragged, I mean, it's very, very difficult for them to assess. And why should I take? There are, I mean, as an entrepreneur, I wanted to take, I should know what I am getting into. I am getting into this particular business, which has X number of assets. This is the total liability. I am paying Y amount, which will get distributed. The moment, the day I take over, it is a clean slate. I am getting the assets, I am getting the track record, I am getting the legal entity, but I am not burdened with any of the legacy issues. So this was initially a little bit of a issue. But over a period of time, even the Supreme Court has said that it has to be a clean slate. The government also has amended. That way, currently, the framework is very good. Somebody wanted to acquire assets through insolvency. I mean, entire framework is made very, very clear and very, very, very good. A lot of companies which are growing want to acquire the assets. Like an example, like SR Steel, acquired by Tata Steel. I mean, huge asset. I mean, if they were to build, maybe it would have taken maybe 5, 7, 10 years. Maybe it would have costed 2x of the money, but they were able to acquire. So definitely some of the companies and groups who are looking for an assets, and they found this very, very attractive, and I mean, it also generated fantastic returns to those equity shareholders. So that way the resolution process is done very well. But I mean, though some of them are rosy stories, right? I mean, some of them are very, very large companies. There is they are listed entities, high amount of governance and all of that. But the problem is with the small and medium enterprises, where the promoters are very very critical to those businesses. A lot of those companies getting the resolution applicants, buyers, is becoming big problem. I mean, people are not coming here for real estate. Whole idea is, let us protect this entity, see that business continues, see that employment continues. X is not able to do efficiently, let the Y come and do it the more efficient way. That was the thinking. But what is also happening, given the the timelines which is taking, I mean, whatever timelines we thought originally, they have gone haywire. What it was thought that in 270 days it should get resolved, it is taking 3 years. I mean, the resolution professional is only trustee. He can only do a few things. He doesn't have money at his stake. There's no credit line available. Already company is going stress. So the value of asset is getting deteriorated. This is one concern because of the speed and all of that. I just wanted to share one of my own matter I have been handling, and Mr. Raju also has been helping in this matter. I have been the resolution professional for a company called Lanco Hoskote Limited, Highway Limited. It's a special purpose vehicle for the Lanco Group, and it's a toll project, 80-kilometer toll project, the outskirts of Bangalore. I'll just take maybe 5 minutes to explain, to see so that maybe more people can appreciate how it benefits in the whole various stakeholders. So the 80 kilometers road, and there were 2 lenders. One is the ICICI Bank and the other one is the State Bank of India. And when a project went live almost 10 years back, it is reasonably running. We have almost 6 crores of monthly toll collection. But what was happening was the ICICI Bank was having second charge, SBI was having the primary charge. Whatever toll collection which was happening, it was only able to service the State Bank of India. He was the primary lender, escrow, he has an escrow account. Whatever money is coming, he is using only for to recover his own use. He's not sharing anything to the ICICI Bank, which has a second charge. They went ahead and filed this insolvency application, which got admitted. I mean, the few things have happened because of this. Prior to getting this admitted into insolvency, this asset was a standard asset with the State Bank of India. The RBI regulations say, obviously, also because of the framework, once it gets admitted, once a company gets admitted into insolvency, that has to be classified as a non-performing asset. In the SBI books, a close to maybe 250 crores of, the liability has become a NPA. That is one repercussion which has happened. Then, obviously, all this toll project, national NHAI is the, concessionary, is the principal, and, the SPV is the agent. Given the less amount available to service the financial creditor or a secured lender, there was very less money is available for the operations and maintenance of the road. Even the road was not being serviced for 2 to 3 years prior to the getting it admitted. NHAI was very unhappy, and SBI is another public sector, and they're all fighting. You're not giving enough money for the road maintenance. Once this got admitted, we got little liberty, and we could take as an independent decision what is required in the safety perspective, improve the road. And NHAI was extremely happy. What they were looking for, they were looking for the safety of the traffic and whether the road is maintained properly or not. That is how we started, and the entire the outstanding was principal was around 300 crores, and with the claims and all, it has become 600 crores. Now also there are a lot of issues which came up, particularly in this company, other companies also. Wherever this government company, a government has a role in some form or other. You have state electricity boards, who have signed the PPA. Here NHAI has signed a concession agreement. There is a condition which says that every 5 years a major maintenance has to be done, which calls for almost 125 crores for every 5 years. There was one major maintenance which was due, which has not been done. And we went through a bidding process, and we had multiple bidders. There's only finally 2 bidders who came in, and there is a bidder from Indore who, the person coming from the similar background, participated in the bidding process, and he has become a successful bidder, and the company has been handed over to him. But we were to the NHAI, they think their own concession agreement is a constitution, nothing can change. The resolution applicant sought some waivers from them, and the NCLT has approved, but subsequently NHAI has gone ahead and challenged this, and which took little more time. Now today it is implemented, and most of the money has been paid. Little more money will be, some more money has to be paid by March 22. This is a 200 crore resolution. Except there is a delay. What has happened? A productive asset has moved from in some form, where inefficient operations or the high cost, not able to service, to a now serviceable level, which has happened very, very swiftly, except the timelines. Now even the incoming buyer has a more visibility on the revenue and costs and all that. He is able to put a right price and acquire. So there are decent number of success stories on the resolution side. Speed is becoming little concern, but if you look at overall what is happening, resolution versus liquidation, for every one resolution there are 3 companies going into liquidation, which is again concern. When we say liquidation, government again came out that even in the liquidation we should not allow company to die. Let us give one more opportunity for people to take over as a going concern. Resolution in the liquidation. So there is a little bit of success in the resolution in the liquidation, but overall for every one resolution, 3 companies are going into liquidation, which is impacting the employment and so many other things. But in terms of number of companies going into insolvency, at the all India level or in Hyderabad, there were a dirty dozen, like Lanco, like Videocon, like SR. There are dirty dozen which have almost 3 lakh crores of NPA. They have gone through this. 90% of them have gone through this. Even in Hyderabad, a lot of infra companies have gone through this. Viceroy is going through this. Trident is going through this. As a framework, it is very, very good. But today, after 3-4 years of experience, I think there are a couple of things which have, in some whatever they what we thought as an objective versus where we are today. Again, maybe we are going back to the pre-IBC era in terms of timelines. The speed of resolution very important. Maybe partly because of the COVID, partly because of the various stakeholders are party to the delays. If the delay is not addressed, again, we are also going to see this insolvency resolution framework also is not serving the purpose for which it is set up, which is not good. But I think government has seized up this matter. Maybe hopefully we should see maybe quicker resolution. Just to give a data point, more than 75% of the companies are taking more than 270 days. Idea was 180 days plus 90 days. In 270 days, we should have a resolution. But today, more than 75% of the matters are taking, more than 75% of the companies going through insolvency, taking more than 270 days. I mean, which is not a good sign. I mean, this is on the resolution. I think, as I said, it is a clean slate mechanism, except the wherever there were criminal proceedings against those promoters, they will continue. But at least against the company, there will be no criminal proceedings will continue after the acquisition because there is a new management, and entire recovery proceedings, contingent liabilities, known, unknown, everything prior to the NCLT order gets extinguished. That way, it is a clean slate to the acquirer. That way, I think the framework is very good in terms of moratorium, providing essential services, giving clean slate and all that, except a little bit of issue on the speed. So I'll stop here on the corporate resolution is concerned. Then maybe I'll briefly touch upon the pre-packed insolvency resolution. I mean, before companies getting into corporate insolvency, particularly wherever there is a banking lending, there is a OTS mechanism, there are multiple mechanisms are available. Generally, banks, take exhaust those options and then come here. And even here, before getting into here, because the control is going from corporate debtor and existing owners to the COC and resolution professional, government has provided again a very new framework, pre-packed insolvency resolution. Idea is existing management can work out a resolution process and get the acceptance of the creditors and then go to NCLT and get the approval. Again, idea is reduce the time, give one more opportunity to the existing managements to see that if they are able to come out on their own. That's how this mechanism is built. Very new. We are yet to see. There are a couple of companies got admitted, but we are yet to see the successful outcomes. Even here, if the existing management is providing any waivers to any of the creditors, then it has to go through the open bidding process. If he's able to satisfy all the existing creditors without any haircut, then existing management will be able to retain the company. Otherwise, he has to go through the open bidding process. Then he may lose the control. I mean, this is on the pre-pack is concerned. Then the other thing which I wanted to talk very briefly on the personal guarantors. I mean, in India, I think entire lending is backed by the personal guarantors of the promoters. Either you take retail loans or the large corporates, without the personal guarantee of the promoters, no loan is sanctioned, except maybe 1% or maybe less than that. Very nifty 50 companies may have this luxury that promoters need not give their guarantee, still they can borrow. So corporate debtor is independent, guarantor is independent. So while the corporate debtor goes through resolution and somebody acquires, obviously none of these companies, creditors are able to realize entire money, right? Obviously, right? I mean, it's an insolvent companies. So for every 100 rupees due, they are getting 5 rupees, 10 rupees, 20 rupees. So where does these bankers or the creditors recover the balance money? Wherever there are personal guarantees given for those loans, those banks can go after the personal guarantors and recover what is possible. Again, the framework earlier was, the civil courts and all. Now, guarantors associated with the corporate borrowing, it has to go to the National Company Law Tribunal. For other individual guarantors, it is the DRT, which is not notified. But the personal guarantors associated with the corporates is the National Company Law Tribunal. And again, idea is even the guarantor should come out. I mean, obviously nobody wanted to have a hanging sword, right? You could not deliver, not delivered. Company has gone, but this is hanging on you. So you can all, the promoter also can come out, whatever money is available, whatever, I mean, obviously there may be a lot more loans, right? Other than this particular corporate data at a personal level also there may be loans. So you can prepare a resolution plan or a repayment plan. These are my assets. This is what money is available. These are my liabilities. And this is how I am going to pay, and take the 3/4 creditors approval, get the NCLT approval and implement it. It's a core NCLT supervised, resolution process for the individual corporate guarantors. Again, this very, very nascent stage, and there was a challenge on whether this should continue. Anil Ambani went and challenged this in the Supreme Court, and finally we got the Supreme Court said, I mean, it is definitely constitutional, and the lenders can go after the personal guarantors while the corporate debtor got resolved through insolvency. Again, it's our very, very early stage. Maybe we'll see more action and more resolution coming for the personal guarantors, maybe next 6 months to 1 year. I'll stop here. Wait for the questions. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thank you so much for such a detailed address and with so much of information for the corporates. I have requested participants to post their questions, but as of now, we got all the requests for sharing the PPTs for both the speakers. So I think we'll see if we can, we'll be sharing the recording of of the program, and we can see if we can share the PPTs also.
We cannot open the floor for the questions. They can ask directly to us.
If somebody wants to ask any question, they can raise their hands. I can see in the participants and we can unmute them.
So request the participants to raise your hand so that she can allow you to speak.
Raju Garu, CN Rao here.
Yes.
So I have a small doubt.
Yes,
Is all these acts, sometimes they have an overriding clause.
yes.
The SEZ Act says it is overriding clause.
Yeah.
And Income Tax Act, or just now you said that IBC is also having overriding clause. If two acts are having overriding clause, if there is a issue with regard to those two acts only, then which one will prevail?
So whichever is the latest one will prevail over the old one.
Oh, I see. Okay. Okay.
So if it is state enactment and central enactment will prevail over the state enactment. And
Okay.
both of them are central enactments, then the latest one will prevail over the old one.
But if it is a state and central enactment and then issue, the subject matter is the important thing to decide about the overriding clause, no?
No. See, that
I
is
mean,
what
is the
if it a
subject
state
matter with
subject-
related to state subject or central subject?
Hmm.
That is one factor maybe. Or otherwise, if it is a common subject, say with respect to say liquidation or insolvency, etc., then as you said, the latest one will prevail.
Yes.
Okay.
But the state government enactments, like some, if you take it in innovative case, wherein that the Maharashtra have a Undertaking Relief Act, which also has certain powers to the state government to give. But
Okay.
IBC, the Supreme Court said that as IBC will override that state enactment.
Okay.
So like
Raghubabu Garu.
certain
Cheppandi.
Raghubabu Garu,
Yeah.
so you just spoke about personal guarantees.
Yeah.
Now I came to understand, I mean, off late, even if you give personal guarantee or not given a personal guarantee, sometimes they may go against the personal properties of the promoters, etc. Is there anything such like that?
No, no. If you have not given personal guarantee, definitely the lender cannot go after against the individual or individual properties. Definitely no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Definitely no. Okay.
Yeah, definitely
No,
no. And
but,
maybe Mr. Raju also can
But
add.
if there is any proven that the accounting or siphoning of funds, etc., was proven, then they may go to the personal properties, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
no, see what happens normally when, so like, like some of the like FEMA, if you take it, and there is a violations and all that, the directors are personally responsible. Even though there is no guarantee from them, the authorities can attach the properties of personals. And they can see that where that money has been flown into. See, if the company money, the corporate debtors money, but it is invested or routed through a promoter to some asset. So that asset is acquired through a fraud, then they have a right to attach it. That is one. Second, there are so many schemes like chit fund schemes, or people run a lot of illegal schemes and make a lot of money and buy properties in their name. So in this sort of cases also, that corporate will and all that they will lift and they will attach the properties of the promoter.
Okay.
Raju, there is one more question in the chat you want to answer on the liquidation this thing.
Yeah, and also Mr. Parag has raised the hand. So first,
Can you throw light on the NCLT rule and powers of NCLT in the context of IBC? So rule number 15 is a inherent powers of the NCLT. So it is like a section 151 of CPC. So they can they can exercise their inherent powers, and can be exercised by the NCLT. Wherever there are specifically certain powers are not given, but in that context of IBC and Companies Act, they can use that provision and give that reliefs to their parties.
so Mr. Parag, you have raised your hand. So I have opened your. You can unmute yourself and please ask your question.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yeah, my question is to Mr. Raju. So thank you for putting Innovative Industries in your presentation. I am one of the promoter of Innovative Industry. So this company, very interesting history. After the IPO, it went bankrupt in 2 years. So let me go directly to the question. So the company got into IPO after 2 years. It got restructured through a mechanism called corporate debt restructuring, and corporate debts were restructured. And at that time, the banks took the personal guarantee. Before that, there were the top promoters who had given the personal guarantee, while we were the minority promoters handling some of the operations. So I was handling the American operation of the company. So I was asked that you give a personal guarantee, and we are restructuring the dates. After the dates were restructured, immediately in a 1 year, company went for a liquidation. So the banks never given the full money, which was they were supposed to give in whatever mechanism it was. And the whole company, after several legal things back and forth, it went into the liquidation very quickly. Into the liquidation in 2017 and 18, the 17 banks had 1,000 crore debt, and the liquidation took place, and the 89 crores was the amount which bank got after the liquidation process. And the company was taken over by someone I know who is very close, who were very close to the promoters. Now my question is, after that they invoked the personal guarantee of all of us. A few banks, not all of them. I think 2-3 banks. And now, someone is asking me, there is a new law where you can like Mr. Babu said just now, you declare yourself and you settled. So what happened is last 3-4 years the case is coming in DRT, but nothing is happening. So one of the time when we got a chance to present, my lawyer presented the case and he said the personal guarantee doesn't stand because you have restructured my client's debt, but you have never given the money, and the whole CDR is what do you call is a failure. Now, surprisingly, the judiciary has not given any decision on that. So, I mean, I just want to know whether this personal guarantee things stands effectively. So my question actually is, if the personal guarantee things are taken seriously, are there any precedents which we can take, or we have to go and file our individual bankruptcies, which is said by Mr. Babu?
So here, if you see, if you are challenging the personal guarantee, the dispute, that you need to do it before the debt recovery tribunal, which I think you have already done that. So apart from that, the personal guarantor to corporate persons is now jurisdiction is NCLT. Since the company is already in liquidation, the lenders can go ahead and file against you under section 95 of the IBC for personal guarantor insolvency. So there are so many cases were filed. In fact, I myself filed more than 75 cases. Today, in fact, we got 10 of them were listed before NCLT. See, once it is listed before the NCLT, in the first instance itself, they'll appoint the insolvency resolution professional. Then he will examine it and file a report, and the personal guarantor given an opportunity to file counter. Then they will examine it, and then they will appoint a resolution professional for insolvency. So right now in Hyderabad, we are at the stage where the insolvency resolution professionals were appointed and they given their report, and the personal guarantors are filed their counters and had to be admitted by the NCLT in none of the cases. I think 1 or 2 cases were reserved for others. We have to see that how it will go through. So they, but in your case, I think even though there is a dispute by you in DRT, yes, still creditors can go ahead and file section 95 before the NCLT. If you want to file it, you can go ahead and file before the NCLT under section 94 of the IBC. The day you file application, you will get a moratorium. Interim moratorium will be effective, and nobody can take any action against you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I request all other participants, if anybody wants to ask any question, they can raise hands. I think we'll circulate the recording and then the details of our speaker. And now I take this opportunity to present vote of thanks on behalf of Indo-American Chamber of Commerce. I would like to thank our esteemed speakers of this session, Mr. VVSN Raju, founder and managing partner of Juris Prime Law Service, and Mr. Raghu Babu Ji, co-founder and partner, Smishti Legal, for joining us today, sharing their knowledge with our members with such a comprehensive presentation, such a detailed address, and also clarifying all the queries. I also like to thank and congratulate IICC leadership and especially Mr. C. Narayan Rao, Vice Chairman, IICC APNTS, for taking this initiative and organizing the series of knowledge session for benefit of our members. Last but not the least, I thank all our participants for attending this informative session. And I'm sure that each one of you will be benefited by this industry deliberations of this session. Thank you one and all. And I will be circulating the recording and other details on Monday. So in case if anybody miss anything, they can call me or they can mail me on my email ID. Thank you one and all. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Raj Garu. Thank you, Raghu Babu Garu.
Thank you.